The lower decks of the alien warship were a place no one wanted to visit. It smelled of rust, sweat, and something worse. The air heavy and stale, dim red lights flickered along the narrow corridor, casting long shadows across rows of metal cages. Inside one of these cages sat a thin, fragile figure, his back hunched, his skin pale under the grime. His name, once, had been Cairn. But no one called him that anymore to the alien crew. He was just Cargo 47, a number written in fading paint on the bars of his cage. He had been there for so long that days and nights no longer meant anything. The collar around his neck was not only heavy, but cruel. It stole his voice, sending shocks through his body whenever he tried to speak. His chains clinked softly when he moved. But most of the time, he didn't bother to move at all. No one cared, no one noticed, and the ship's crew passed by without even glancing his way. Cairn's world had shrunk to the size of his cage. The metal floor was cold and always damp, the walls stained with marks of others who had been there before him. Some had died here, their bodies taken away in silence. He had once dreamed of escaping, but the dream had died years ago, replaced by an empty, numb acceptance. Food was thrown in once a day, a small, stale piece of bread, like ration, and a cup of murky water. Sometimes they forgot, and his stomach would ache for hours. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines and the distant clanging of machinery. Time moved like thick tar, slow and suffocating. Then one day, something. Changed bootsteps echoed down the corridor, steady, confident, and different from the usual heavy stomps of the alien guards. Cairn looked up for the first time in days, his dull eyes catching sight of a figure walking toward him. It was a human, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark engineer's uniform smeared with oil. His name was Marcus, though Cairn didn't know it yet. Marcus was there for an inspection. At least, that was the excuse. His gaze swept across the cages, but when he saw Cairn, he stopped, unlike the others. Marcus didn't look away. He crouched down until his face was level with the bars. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Cairn expected the same cold indifference he had seen 100 times before, but instead, Marcus's eyes held something else. Pity, and maybe anger. "What happened to you?" Marcus murmured under his breath, his voice low enough that the security cameras wouldn't catch the words. Cairn tried to speak, but the collar hissed and sparked, sending a sharp pain down his neck. He winced, lowering his head. Marcus's jaw tightened, and he glanced down the corridor to make sure they were alone. "I'll get you out," he whispered, his voice firm but quiet. Cairn blinked slowly, not sure if he had heard right. No one had spoken to him like that in years. The human's tone was not casual. It was a promise. Marcus stood up, tapping the bars lightly as if to say goodbye without drawing attention. He walked on to inspect the other cages, but Cairn's gaze followed him until he disappeared around the corner. Something strange stirred in his chest, a faint warmth he had forgotten existed. Hope. It was dangerous to feel it, because hope could be crushed. And in this place it always was. Yet the sound of the human's words kept replaying in his head. "I'll get you out." Cairn wanted to believe them, but belief was a luxury he had lost long ago. Hours passed, and the ship's artificial night cycle began. The red lights dimmed further, and most of the crew went to their quarters. Cairn curled in the corner of his cage. But sleep didn't come. He kept thinking about those eyes. That voice, was the human a fool? Or was he serious? Why would anyone risk themselves for a broken, voiceless slave? The question stayed with him, heavy and unsettling, and for the first time in years, Cairn found himself wishing morning would come sooner. Somewhere deep in the warship, Marcus was already thinking of ways to make his words real. And neither of them knew that this small meeting, this brief exchange through cold metal bars, would change both of their lives forever. Marcus did not sleep that night. He lay on the thin bunk in his small cabin, staring at the ceiling as the hum of the warship's engines filled the silence. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the alien in the cage, the hollow stare, the thin frame, the collar sparking against pale skin. It burned in his mind like a wound. He had seen prisoners before. But something about this one was different. The way their eyes had met. The way the alien had flinched from pain yet stayed silent. It gnawed at him. The crew called them cargo, but Marcus knew better. That was not cargo. That was a person, and leaving them there felt like walking away from someone drowning. The next day, Marcus took the maintenance route instead of the main corridor. The cameras in these passages were older, slower, easier to fool. In his tool bag, between wrenches and circuit chips, he hid a small piece of protein bread and a sealed pouch of clean water. When he reached the lower decks, the guards were half asleep. Leaning against the wall, he passed them with a nod, pretending to check a datapad when he reached the cage. Cairn was curled in the corner, his knees drawn to his chest. Marcus crouched down and slid the food and water through the narrow gap between the bars. The alien lifted his head slowly, eyes wide in disbelief. He took the bread in trembling hands. Biting into it like a starving child, Marcus felt a tightness in his chest, an anger at the universe for letting this happen. For the next few days, Marcus kept coming back. Always, when no one was looking, he brought scraps, water, even a thin thermal cloth to help against the cold metal floor. Karen's eyes began to change, the deadness fading just a little, replaced by something watchful. They couldn't speak. But Marcus started tapping on the bars in small patterns. A short tap, a pause, then 2 quick taps meant yes. 2 slow taps meant no. It was simple, but it was enough to ask questions. One day he tapped, "Can you walk?" Karen hesitated, then gave the yes signal, though Marcus could see it wasn't fully true. Rumors began to spread among the crew. Someone was sneaking into the cages more often than necessary. Marcus kept his head down, doing his regular work, but the tension was growing. He knew they would search soon. And if they found the extra food or cloth in Karen's cage, it would be over for both of them one evening. As he left the lower decks, he heard 2 alien officers talking in hushed tones. "There's a traitor helping the slaves," one said, their voice sharp. "Find them and make it public." The other replied. Marcus's stomach turned cold. He had less time than he thought that night. Marcus sat at his work desk, drawing lines on a small piece of scrap metal with a dull stylus. He was mapping the guard rotations, the supply drop times, the blind spots in the cameras. There was a narrow window every 4 days when the docking bay had the fewest guards during the shift change at 3rd cycle. If he could get Karen there without being seen, they might make it to a maintenance pod, but the collar was the problem. If he tried to cut it without the right code, it would trigger an alarm and possibly kill Karen instantly. Marcus would have to steal the override key. And that meant entering the officers' quarters. If he was caught there, there would be no trial, only a bullet to the head. Still, when he thought about walking away, he saw those eyes again. The silent plea, the quiet endurance. Marcus knew he was already in too deep to stop. And somewhere in the darkness of the cage, Karen lay awake too. For the first time in years, he was counting the hours. It's not for food, not for water, but for the sound of human footsteps coming closer. The day of the plan came sooner than Marcus expected. The warship had docked at a small supply station, its crew busy unloading cargo and refueling. It was the shift change Marcus had been waiting for. The short moment when one guard team left and the next had not yet arrived. He moved quickly, carrying his tool bag, his heart beating like a drum in his chest. When he reached the cage, Karen was already awake, eyes locked on him. Marcus slid the bread through the bars like he always did, but this time he also pulled at a small device. It was a stolen override key, smooth and cold, about the size of a coin. Karen's eyes widened as Marcus leaned close and whispered so softly it was almost a breath. Today, the device hissed when pressed against the collar, a small light flickering. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened, and Marcus's stomach dropped. Then the collar clicked open and fell to the floor with a dull clang. Karen's hands went to his throat, feeling the bare skin for the first time in years. There was no time to celebrate. Marcus pulled a hidden key from his sleeve. Unlocking the cage with a twist and a slow creak, he helped Karen to his feet. The alien was weak, but he could walk. They slipped into the service corridor. Moving fast but silent, every corner they turned felt like it could be their last. Halfway to the docking bay, Marcus heard voices. He pushed Karen into a dark storage room, closing the door just enough to hide them. 2 guards walked past, their footsteps heavy on the metal floor. Marcus didn't breathe until the sound faded. When they stepped back into the hallway, the docking bay doors were just ahead. Marcus's pulse quickened. They might actually make it. But then the alarm blared, a sharp, piercing sound that filled the ship. The docking bay doors slammed shut before they could reach them. Shouting echoed down the corridors, boots pounding closer. "Run," Marcus whispered. Grabbing Karen's arm, they darted down another passage, trying to lose the guards, but a stun blast hit the wall just beside them. Showering sparks across the floor, Karen stumbled, and Marcus caught him before he fell. 2 guards appeared. In front of them, weapons raised, Marcus stepped in front of Karen without thinking. The first blast hit him square in the chest. Sending a jolt of pain through his body, he fell to one knee but refused to move aside. The second blast took them both down, the world spinning into darkness. When Karen woke, he was back in the cage, but this time Marcus was there too, chained to the bars beside him. His uniform was burned where the stun blast had hit. His breathing shallow but steady. Karen stared at him, something breaking open inside his chest. No one had ever done that for him. No one had ever put themselves in harm's way just to protect him. In the silence, they both understood something. This was no longer just survival. 'Twas a promise, one neither of them could let go of. The days after the failed escape were harder than before. The guards doubled their patrols. The food rations were cut in half, and the air in the lower decks felt heavier. Marcus was chained in the cage beside Karen now, the cold metal biting into his wrists. He had bruises across his face and burn marks on his chest where the stun blasts had hit. Yet when Karen looked at him, Marcus still gave a faint smile, as if to say he would try again. They could not speak. The guards had fitted the voice collar back on Karen, but they had found another way. When the ship's noise was loudest, they tapped messages on the floor between them. It was slow, clumsy, but it was enough to share thoughts. Marcus told stories of his home, of a blue sky and green fields that stretched for miles. Karen listened, eyes closed, picturing a place where the air was clean and the ground was soft under his feet. Some nights, when the lights dimmed and the guards were far away, Marcus leaned against the bars and spoke in a low voice. He told Karen about rivers that sparkled in the sun, about rain that smelled fresh instead of metallic. Karen would answer with a soft tap, telling Marcus about his own world of mountains that glowed under twin moons and seas that sang when the wind was strong. It was the first time in years that Karen felt like someone cared about who he was. Not just what he was. The other prisoners began to notice. They whispered that the human was foolish, that helping a slave would only get him killed. But Marcus ignored them. Every day he studied the guard patterns again, his mind working through the mistakes of their first attempt. He would glance at the docking bay schedule when no one was looking, memorizing details. There had to be another way. One evening, Karen collapsed from hunger and exhaustion. Marcus caught him before he hit the floor, holding him up even as the guards shouted. They beat Marcus for touching the slave, but he did not let go until they dragged him away. When they returned him to the cage, his lip was split and his knuckles were bleeding. Cairn looked at him with something fierce in his eyes. No one had ever endured pain just to keep him from falling. It lit a fire inside him, a determination that had been buried for too long. That night, Cairn tapped a question on the floor. Why? Marcus hesitated, then tapped back slowly. Because you are not nothing? Cairn turned away, hiding the sting in his eyes. But his hands trembled, as if those words had broken something. Heavy inside him, in the dark, with only the hum of the engines around them. They both knew the fight wasn't over. They would try again, no matter the cost. The warning sirens began without any attack, a deep, rumbling alarm that made the walls vibrate and the lights flicker. Through the intercom, the ship's commander shouted orders in a harsh alien tongue. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Something dangerous was coming moments later. The deck shuddered under their feet. The lights turned a pale blue, and an automated voice echoed through the corridors. Solar storm inbound, all sectors on lockdown. Cairn's eyes met Marcus's, both of them knowing that in chaos there was opportunity. The guards rushed through the lower decks, sealing bulkheads and moving supplies in their hurry. They didn't check the cages as closely as usual. Marcus leaned toward Cairn, whispering under his breath so the noise of the ship covered his voice. This is it. He reached under his shirt and pulled out a thin strip of metal he had hidden for days. It was a piece of stolen maintenance wire, strong enough to pick the cage lock. With quick, practiced movements, Marcus worked the wire into the lock until it clicked open. The color came next. The override key he had stolen earlier still worked, and with a soft hiss, the device unclamped from Cairn's neck. For the first time in years, Cairn could breathe without the weight of that metal. They moved fast, keeping low and silent. Marcus guided him through the narrow service tunnels, the ones without cameras. The ship rocked again as the storm's energy waves hit, making the lights flash on and off. They reached a heavy blast door leading to the emergency escape pods, but the control panel was dead, its power cut by the storm. Marcus looked at the manual override lever beside it. His face tightened. He knew what it meant to open the door manually. Someone had to hold the lever in place the entire time. The energy surge from it would be enough to kill whoever stayed behind. Marcus turned to Cairn, his voice steady even as the storm's rumble grew louder. You have to go. Now. Cairn shook his head, stepping back, but Marcus grabbed his shoulders firmly. You survived too much to die here, he said, forcing a small smile. Without waiting for an answer, Marcus pulled the lever. Searing light and heat burst from the metal. Running up his arms, he gritted his teeth, refusing to let go. As the door slowly began to rise, "Go," he shouted, his voice breaking. Cairn hesitated only a moment before stepping through, his hands trembling as he looked back. Marcus was still holding the lever, his body shaking violently. Don't waste it. Marcus gasped. The escape pod hatch opened, and Cairn climbed inside, his chest tight with a pain he couldn't describe. He reached out, but the pod doors slid shut, sealing him in. The last thing he saw through the small window was Marcus, still standing there, still holding the way open. The pod ejected with a thunderous burst, spinning away from the warship into the dark void. Inside, Cairn gripped the seat so hard his knuckles turned white. Tears blurred his vision, but in his heart, one thought burned clear. Marcus had given everything for him, and he would not let that be the end. Cairn woke to the sound of soft voices. The air smelled different, clean, warm. Nothing like the metallic stench of the warship. When he opened his eyes, he saw pale walls and a low ceiling made of rough wood. He was lying on a narrow bed. A blanket pulled over him. Two alien traders stood nearby, their eyes curious but not unkind. "You're safe here," one of them said. Placing a cup of water in his hands, Karen drank, the cool liquid washing away the dryness in his throat. Safe, the word felt strange, almost unreal, over the next few days. He learned he was on a neutral trading station far from any war zone. The traders had found his escape pod drifting in space, its systems failing. They had no idea who he was or where he had come from. To them, he was just another survivor. But every time Karen closed his eyes, he saw Marcus standing at that lever, the light burning up his arms. He could still hear the human's last words, "Don't waste it," when Karen finally had the strength to walk. He asked around the station for news of the warship. Most had heard nothing. Others said it had been damaged by the solar storm and limped. To a military port, no one believed any prisoner could have survived. But then one old mechanic hunched over a table of tools, lowered his voice, and told Karen something. There was talk, he said, about a human badly hurt, being sold instead of executed. The words hit Karen like a pulse of fire through his chest. Marcus was alive, somewhere, but in chains. That night, Karen lay awake in the small room the traders had given him. He stared at the ceiling, his mind turning over and over. He could stay here, be safe, try to build a quiet life. But every beat of his heart told him that was impossible. The human had risked everything for him, had given him freedom at the cost of his own. Karen knew what he had to do. He would find Marcus, no matter how far, no matter the danger. And when he found him, he would be the one to break the chains this time. The underground market was hidden beneath the rusting docks of a lawless trade moon. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp scent of oil. Merchants shouted over one another, selling stolen goods, illegal weapons, and living beings. Karen moved through the crowd with his hood pulled low, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step brought him closer to the place he had been searching for, the slave auction. He had spent weeks chasing rumors, bribing thieves, and trading everything of value he owned. Now, at last, he was here, and he prayed he wasn't too late. The auction pit was lit by harsh white lamps, the shadows around it deep and crawling. One by one, prisoners were pushed forward, their chains clinking, their heads down. Karen's eyes scanned every face, ignoring the jeers of the crowd. Then he saw him, Marcus. His head was bowed, his hair longer and tangled, his face gaunt. Bruises and burns marked his skin. But he was alive the moment their eyes met. Karen felt the weight in his chest break apart. Marcus blinked, confusion flashing in his tired eyes. He didn't seem to believe what he was seeing. The auctioneer barked out the starting price. Voices shouted offers, coins and credits exchanged in flashes of greed. Karen stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "I'll take him." The crowd turned to stare, laughter rippling through them, a freed slave buying a human to them. It was absurd, but Karen didn't flinch. He placed a pouch of credits on the table. Every last coin he had left. The auctioneer's grin widened. Greed winning over mockery. "Sold," he said, slamming his hand down when Marcus was unchained and pushed forward. He stumbled. Karen caught him, holding him steady. Up close, Marcus's eyes were glassy, but they searched Karen's face with recognition. "You got out," he whispered, his voice raw. Karen's grip tightened, his words quiet but fierce. "I told you, it's my turn to save you." Around them, the crowd murmured, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent, but Karen didn't care. He guided Marcus out of the pit, each step carrying them farther from the noise, the chains, the darkness. They had both been caged, silenced and forgotten. But now, together, they were free.